Hello, week 5, already crazy wild. Here's my reading reflection for week 5. There were a lot of articles and stuff this week, so for the sake of time, I don't want my video to be so long. So for the sake of time, I probably won't touch on every single one, but I'm gonna connect as many as I can. So we'll see. I started with the open letter to Brene Brown. Sorry, I should bring my computer over here so I don't. No. Okay, sorry. Um, so I really liked this letter. I don't know a ton about Brene Brown's work. I think she's a psychologist. I probably should have or could have looked her up, but from what I have friends who have read her books and really love them, and I know that she does good work. And from this letter, I learned that she does a lot of work around shame, which is really interesting. I wanna look her up, but I guess first I just want to talk about how I love the like tone of this letter. I think that it's really a great example of call-in culture, and I I believe that there is a good time and a good place to call people out and to call out injustice and call it like you see it almost. But I also know that um, we there's a lot of room to call people in and to call people into community, and I just love that there's so much understanding in this critique essentially. I mean, not essentially, that's what it is. It's a critique of her speech and her words. But there's an understanding that Brene Brown doesn't exist in a fat body, and that she doesn't have the perspective of a fat person, and that there's just an understanding that it that her words weren't meant to harm, and that her overall message is one that is that's, I don't know, good, but it's a good message, and she's trying to spread acceptance. And I just like at the end of it she says, um, this letter is not meant to shame you because I truly believe you don't know about the experience of a fat person who is trying to reclaim their body and has decided that they will not be blamed for the cultural oppression and stigma of weight bias and fat phobia. You yourself might be deathly afraid of being fat. I know that fear so deeply, and that is why I feel it is my duty to share with you my experience. Because if we are truly going to make the world a better place, then we have to do it together. And I just think that that's literally, she's calling her into community and calling her into saying, hey, we have to work through this together, and I know that you didn't intend to alienate me from this conversation, or to, like how she phrases it in the letter is like cut her heart like with tiny little cuts. It's just very understanding, and that's kind of like how I want to practice and how I want to exist is with an understanding of perspective, and that people, hopefully, their intention is not to hurt, and their intention is kind and good, and that I and we can learn to see those differences, and to see when someone is speaking out of ignorance and when someone is speaking out of hate. And it's really hard sometimes to know, and when everything you see is speaking out of hate, or a lot of what you see, then sometimes it's hard to be like kind and understanding when it's more out of ignorance. So yeah, I really liked the letter. And then the video, the lose hate not weight video, it was really, when the first girl walked out, the girl who's not, oh gosh, what's her name? I should, Virgie Tovar. My immediate reaction, because the premise of bringing someone else out first was that, like, would you believe that I was an expert in my field if you knew that I was fat? And my first thought when that girl came out was like, oh, she's not fat. So I was wondering what her, like, what perspective she could have on being an expert on like fat phobia and weight in society, what the like implications of that were for her as a person who was not fat. And I know that I've been using the word fat easily, and that's something that from the people I have recently started trying to become more knowledgeable about, like I don't like body positivity, but like just the like anti-fat shaming community, and almost all of the women who I follow from that have tried to reclaim the word fat. And I don't think that, I mean, I know that I don't get to do that because I'm not a part of that community. So I guess I'm still trying to work through that. But I think that the whole point behind that is like they don't want to dance around their identity. I don't know. So I don't know if that's something that I can say. So maybe I'll stop. I'll think about it more. I don't know. But my first thought was that she was not a part of that community, and so I was just curious as to how, if people, if her, I don't know, if people agreed with her work. And I think that someone, I'm getting it, someone who is fat I would trust their expert opinion more. As someone who is a part of that community and experiences the things that, the discrimination that fat people experience. So it was interesting how she did it because she thought, I don't know, it was just weird. Both of the Letter to Brene Brown and the Lose Hate Not Weight videos focused on shame and internalized shame, and the shame that we learn as at a very young age, the shame for our body. And I mean, I'm a cis woman, so I've grown up with the experience of my body being objectified and my body being policed, and learning to police my own body, and policing my body so that others don't do it for me. But I just think it's such a diverse experience of women internalizing shame about their body. And I think it's interesting because around the end of high school, I super randomly lost like 20 pounds. And nobody talked to me about my body until I lost weight. And I didn't care as much about my body until I lost weight. And it's been a really interesting journey that I've been on of like, I care more, or I don't, not that I care more, but I police myself more now that my body looks like how I always wanted it to look. Now that I have the body that I thought I would be happier with, I'm more unhappy. And I just don't, it feels so contradictory to what we're taught. And I hear women in the office. I work in an office, and I'm just like a student worker, so I'm the youngest. And I hear all these women talking about their weight loss journeys and how all you want once you lose weight is to lose 10 more pounds or something like that, and how they're just like constantly chasing the what's next, and what else they can do, and how else they can transform their bodies. And I just think that we're taught to strive towards these goals, but there's no resolution. I think we will never be satisfied if we work to fulfill these ideals. If we're not doing it because that's how we genuinely want to be, then we're never going to be happy living within this system. So I don't know, I have a lot of thoughts. The inspiration porn video made me think of an activist named Eli Clare, and they're a queer disabled activist. They have cerebral palsy, and we talked about them in my queer ecologies class last year, and they have this concept called super crip, which is essentially inspiration porn, and it's just people with disabilities or disabled people doing things that able-bodied people do every day, and then glorifying them for it. So Eli Clare loves hiking and climbing, and has climbed lots of different mountains and hiked these like long hikes and gone on all these things. And there are people who want to take inspiration from that and to say that they're a super crip, and because cerebral palsy, they have cerebral palsy, and so climbing a mountain or walking a long way is possibly hard for them. And this whole idea that we look to people who experience disability and as inspirational and something to look up to. And I love what she said about how people with disabilities learn strength and endurance, but against a society that exceptionalizes and objectifies disabled bodies, and not against the bodies themselves. I think even when my group, we did the little conversation thing about how we chose an identity or a privilege that we hold, and then we talked about it, and mine was able-bodied, and a lot of what we talked about was that we were thankful for our able bodies, and that's something that she specifically warned against, and talked about how that is oppressive, and using them as a prop to make us feel lucky or have gratitude, or not to take our bodies for granted, and that's all that we see them as, and how that's problematic. There's a quote at the end. She ends it by saying, "Disability doesn't make you exceptional, but questioning what you think you know about it does." And I like that. And everyone should check out Eli Clare if they get the chance. The Bending Gender article, just like we talked about in class in the workshop today, using the gender assigned at birth instead of biological gender, or saying when you realize that you want to transition versus deciding, or things like that. Just like a deliberate change in language that I want to start making and be conscious of. Basically the article, a lot of it was about like how it's all about how people want to identify, and that there's power. It's empowering to control the language that represents you, and I just connected this to the inspiration porn video, because it's all about having power to identify yourself. So she identifies as a disabled person and not as a person with disabilities, and how that's an intentional choice, and how people get to choose different things. I just like the part about regaining power by, or the idea of regaining power by being able to choose how people, the language that people use around you. And I was thinking about how slurs become common and popularized, and it's just or not just, and I was wondering if it was because the people that they were used against weren't listened to, and so when they spoke out, they weren't heard, and now that there are movements to uplift minority voices, that those people can force the world to face how offensive their language is. And the article also talked about like categories, and queer people defining or not defining different identities that they hold. And I think just like from like what I have learned and decided that I believe and agree with is that categories are restricting to some and empowering to others. So there are some people who hold the identity of woman very, very strongly and tightly, and it's a core part of who they are. And then there are other people who not having to define themselves as woman or as anything else is very freeing to them, and they want to have that choice. And so what is necessary is that we hold space for both, and that we find a way to dismantle the need for labels without eliminating them, because they are good, and labels can give people a sense of place and identity. And that's all I have to say.